Spice FM this and every morning. 87.9 in Mombasa, 102.5 in Kisumu, 96.0 Nakuru. Good morning in Eldoret, 96.7, Nyeri 90.9, and Malindi 97.7. We live stream the show on our digital platforms www.spicefm.co.ke, Spice FM KE on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, as well as Instagram. Of course, joining us this hour is Bishop Dr. David Oginde from the Christ is the Answer Ministries. Bishop, you've been in that church for quite a while now, you know, at the helm of CITAM. We call it CITAM. CITAM is the one in charge of various churches, especially in Nairobi, across Thika, there's one.
How many churches does CITAM? Yes. The family.
CITAM is actually a very small church. Maybe just loud so that
you're being modest.
People think we are just 28 congregations.
Only that's modest.
Only 28.
Only 28
Yes.
churches.
Okay.
No, if you compare with the other churches like the Anglican Church with
Of course.
thousands
Yes.
of churches, I mean,
But
millions
Bishop,
of
the
members.
Anglican Church has existed from the time of creation.
It is true. Yeah, so we are a small church. We are 28 congregations, 24 of them locally and 4 outside the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Outside the country, which countries are those?
We have a church in the US, we have a church in Romania, we have a church in Namibia, and in East Timor.
And the headquarters is Kenya.
It's in Kenya, yes.
So this is one of those instances where you hear a Kenyan church being exported
To East Timor, no less.
East Timor and Romania.
Yeah.
Right?
Look, I you'll forgive me. Where exactly is
East
East?
Timor.
I've heard of the country. I knew it had problems, but where is it exactly?
East Timor is
Southeast
very
Asia.
close to neighboring Indonesia.
Indonesia. Southeast Asia is where you're
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that you'll get your direction.
You can
Where?
you can see Indonesia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Indonesia can see. It's
Yeah.
a big country.
Yes.
I can see it easily.
So East Timor is the opposite of Indonesia. It's a tiny dot.
When
Yeah.
did they get independence?
Very
Because
little.
They were not always East Timor. What were they before?
They were actually part of Indonesia. Yes. So then they got independence and became a country of its own, but a very small one. At that.
They separated.
Yes.
And of course, Romania is in Eastern Europe. CT, I was just...
You know that one at least.
Here, I'm being taken to task. Okay, I get it.
There you go.
Eastern Europe?
Uh-huh.
All right.
And East Asia.
On the... Okay, I
East
get
Asia.
it, guys. I get it. I get
East
it.
Timor. Good. Bishop, karibu sana, and thank you very much for joining us. Of course, you know we invited you because we'd like to talk about separation of church and state in Kenya. This is a matter that, despite it being discussed in the constitution and saying, all right, so is the church opposing this because it wants to be part of the constitution? It's a conversation that keeps rearing its head every now and then. First of all, the basic one. Do you believe that there is proper separation between church and state in Kenya?
First of all, let me say there are two issues. One is separation of church and state, and separation of religion and state. Sometimes people talk about separation of church and state when they mean separation of religion and state. There's a sense in which the two cannot be separated, because the state or government is about people, and religion is also about people. So if you are really to lead people aright, you must take into account all the holistic nature of their lives, which includes religion. So to bring this idea of separation of church and state, it becomes very difficult, and especially religion and state. The whole thing of separation of church and state came about from the US, where in England, in Britain, or Europe in general, where they came from, religion or Christianity was part and parcel of the state. So that the Queen of England, of Britain, for example, was also the head of the church. And so when they moved out and got into the US, they still embraced the whole thing of Christianity as the foundation of their nationhood. But as time went on, there are things that began to come in, and there are people who felt that the church should be allowed to run its own affairs and the state to run its own affairs. And especially when other religions and people without belief in God were rising into prominence, there was this issue that there's a conflict of interest when the church and state operate as one. So they should be separated, that each group should do its own thing. But in reality, it is very difficult for that to happen.
It's not practical.
It is not actually practical. So you see that where they have tried to do that, there's always a conflict. There's always a clash. Because when you come to the studio, if you are a religious person, like the three of you are found here,
Yes.
what drives your beliefs, your values, your ethos, and what you are going to do in studio will actually come out at one point or another. Because you are not two different people. You are one person. So if you have certain values that you hold dear, as you keep talking to us, they will naturally manifest. And if somebody now says you cannot manifest those values in studio, you become a very frustrated person.
It becomes difficult to, remove myself from
Exactly.
that side of me.
And that is what in some nations, especially in the West, Europe and US, Europe in particular, more seriously than the US, they have tried to force people to live an artificial life. So that you come into your workspace and you're supposed to live your religion and all other values that guide your life outside, and come into this space and be like a robot, really. Do things in a neutral way. There is no such thing as a neutral person. When I enter here, I come with my whole self. And everything I'm going to do and say will be guided by the things that I believe in and the things that guide my life. And so when you tell me to now leave that completely out, I become an artificial person. It's not the real me. So when we talk about, therefore, separation of church and state, the only place where that can happen is in terms of the guidelines and principles and practices and policies of a state as an organization. That you can do, but not the people that live and work and interact with the state.
Who should be speaking on behalf of the people when it comes to then matters of religion that you talk about, of morals, of the way in which life should be? Should it be the state, politicians, or should it be the church? Whose voice should ring through clear?
It depends on what it is. Because you see, even our own, if you look at our own country, in the preamble of our constitution, we say that we recognize the supremacy of God Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth. In my brief discussions and interactions with the lawyers, they tell us that the preamble of a constitution is the most important part of a constitution because it is the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Yeah.
So if we have already declared in our constitution that we believe in God, how then can you go ahead and say we don't believe in God? We cannot speak about God. You cannot bring God into issues. So who should speak? Everybody should. Because if in this country we had politicians who recognize God as declared in our constitution, and therefore can speak on behalf of God and for God in the same way as we have indicated, this country would be totally different.
We seem to have politicians who speak on God about issues to do with God when it suits a particular purpose?
Then that is
How
not
then do
speaking
we?
for
How
God.
then we? It seems that it could be a Sunday service today, and because of things that happened the last couple of days, I then want to call on the people and say, you know what, this is not a godly way in which to do things. How can it be that we hear from these individuals who then will use it to their advantage at some point? How do we then separate the two? I'm hearing you say one thing because you're going to go back to the church as the bedrock of your moral belief. But then I see you doing something else. Shouldn't it be one voice all the time if that's the way we're going to go?
Exactly. That is the problem of separation of church and state. Because we have this false notion that you can separate things. So we have people who are living in dichotomy, where when you are in the religious space, you become very religious. You talk, you talk religious. You do things in a religious manner. You look a very pious person because you're in a religious space. When you go into a different space, then you are a totally different person, and people don't seem to even realize what they are doing. But it is this whole notion of that separation.
It's adapting to the circumstance.
It is not
So
adaptive.
if I'm like when you walked in here, we said, all right, so now we're in the presence of a bishop. All right. So even our tone, if you notice, our tone is lower. If it was a politician in here, our tones would be higher.
That's why I told him that he should not just be good-mannered
In your presence.
in my presence,
I must.
even when I'm absent.
You must be
No,
good-mannered
I
all the
must.
time, CT.
All the time.
Especially, not just in your presence, especially when you can see me.
Especially when I can see.
Yes, if
Now,
you can't see me, that's a different matter.
you see
But bringing
now,
back to
the
that,
problem is, we treat God the same way we treat man. Because I can only see you like now I'm seeing you.
Yes.
But God sees you everywhere. Whether you are in the darkest of the dark or in the lightest place, God is seeing you. If we had that ingrained in our minds, then whichever place you are in, if you're serious about living for God and working with God, then it doesn't matter whether bishop is there or not, whether pastor is there or not, or whether colleague, Christian friend is there or not, you will just do the right thing.
You see, the example that I gave about your presence there was because of the culture that we have in the country.
Yes.
You see, that's what it actually reflects. That even whether it is somebody in the highest office or whether it is the simplest of citizens, the idea of presenting an impression we perceive to be desirable is at the foremost in our minds. And it's what determines our behavior, not the need to do good or to do right.
And that's where, as a nation, we have totally failed, because our values are not ingrained.
No, they're not.
When I do leadership training, I talk about values on the wall and values in the heart. You go even to an organization like the Standard Group, and
Mission,
you find
vision, value.
yes, vision, values, and so on. And they are framed nicely, put in a very prominent place. These are our core values. And you can see integrity, excellence, etc., etc. But then you interact with the people working within that organization. You can't see excellence. You can't see integrity. You can't see all those
Honesty.
things. So those are values on the wall. Those are not values in the heart. The values must be removed from the wall and put in the heart.
The people who are best at doing that are
Yes.
the clergy and the religious leaders, being the shepherds of the
Oh,
flock.
we are the best in bringing values to the heart?
Yes, in especially ensuring that values get into our heart and stay there, and we move with them wherever we are going.
Exactly.
It's like a job
Let's go
description.
into this short
Yes.
break, and then when we come out of that, we'll now look at the clergy and the flock, and the role that they play in ensuring that the values stay in our hearts. And when we don't have those values in our hearts, the failures of the clergy on that. David Oginde from CITAM, that's the Christ is the Answer Ministries. And Bishop, before we went into the break, we were talking about, how we conduct ourselves in various places and various platforms. And Ndu had even raised the issue of when somebody is in church and they behave in a certain way, in a pious manner, and then they go into another political forum and they behave differently, and you agreed and you said, yes, this points to a problem that we have in a society. Does it also point to a problem that we have with the leadership of religious organizations?
Yes and no. Part of our heritage, if I talk specifically about the church, part of our heritage as a Christian community in Kenya and in Africa, because this was brought to us by missionaries, was that everything was integrated. You found schools were done by missionaries, by the church, hospitals, and almost all other necessities of life were actually around the Christian faith. Then we came to this place where we separated, which is our topic for today. So we separated these things. So you go to school and then you go to church. You go to hospital and you go to church. You go to government, you go to church. So many people found themselves therefore growing up in this separated kind of life, where church is the place you go to, especially on a Sunday or a Saturday if you're an SDA. And then the rest of the days you go and do your work. Then
So I hear
Sunday
you saying,
you go to church.
So I hear you saying that it must be holistic. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly.
Across board, whether we're talking about leadership, whether we're talking about education, wherever it is,
Everywhere.
it's got to be holistic.
Exactly.
But we still see
So that when you are here in the studio, if you are a Christian, you should actually be a Christian in the studio. Everything you do, everything you say, everything about your life should reflect that faith. So you do not wait on Sunday to be a Christian. And we should not judge you by the fact that you go to church or you don't go to church. It is, are you living a life that is Christian? If you look at the Bible and the way, if we go back to the whole issue of state, the way the government was organized around God. And there were three branches of government, not like the ones we have today. There was the king, there was the prophet, and there was the priest. Those were the three arms of government that ran government under God, with God at the center. All these three people were responsible to God. Paul talks about the king or the governors, he called them governors, which we would call in our time the politicians, as servants of God who are appointed by God, and calls on the believers to pray for them because they have this responsibility that God has given them to make sure that people live in a harmonious, peaceful environment. That is the responsibility that they have been given to bring governance, so that the president, Uhuru Kenyatta, is as much a servant of God as the Archbishop of the Anglican Church. And one is not a greater servant than the other. And they are both responsible to God. So that the president should be asking God, how should I govern the nation? What should I do in this situation? And the prophet's role was to bring the mind of God to the people, so that when God speaks and wants to communicate a message to the whether to the priests, to the people, or to the government leaders, it is the prophet who heard that voice and comes, and in the Bible you hear, "Thus says the Lord." You know, this is what God is saying, and whether you're the king, you had to submit to that which God is saying.
It sounds like you're looking at that and saying, listening to you this morning, you're basically trying to go and play the thin line here and say it's impossible for us to separate ourselves. It's impossible for us to separate church and state, or religion and state, because it's one and it involves people and it's one and the same person. But you see, this is where the danger lies, where we have a leader who is also being influenced by another religious leader. Let's say that a president has, for example, said that I listened to Prophet so-and-so, and Prophet so-and-so has come and is the one who's telling me, you know what, coronavirus is not going to affect us.
You see, God.
Because we see preachers saying that.
Yes. Now, God has given us something called wisdom. When you look at Solomon, Solomon was a king. He was not a priest. He was not a prophet. Solomon was a king, but he was one of the wisest men that ever lived. He had insight into everything. So you cannot, as a king, whether that you are a king of a nation or a king of a company or a king of a home, you cannot abdicate your responsibility for personal thinking and wisdom in every situation. Yes, you'll get guidance. Even the prophets who come to you, you have to listen to them. And the Bible gives you the responsibility to test every spirit that is given to every person. So that even for me, if somebody comes today and say, Bishop Oginde, this is what the Lord is saying, I will listen to them. But I will also go back to the same God and say, God, is this really what you are saying? Yes. So you have to test that spirit. So I do not expect that the president, as a leader of a whole country, will hear the voice of a prophet and take it just like that, especially if it is giving you guidance that seems to be contrary to natural flow
logic
of things.
If you look at the way things happen here, I mean, a lot of times we see political leadership using the church as a platform to push a particular agenda or to send a particular message. We want to then ask the question, it is clear that they have that agenda and that's why they're using that platform at that point. Should it be allowed that that platform should be used? Should it be allowed? And it just seems that mixed messaging would come out.
I think when you say used, that should not be allowed, because then you are simply using the platform. But if you avail yourself, if for example, a politician comes into a church and they have a message that they would want to communicate to the people as a leader in the nation, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that if the leader in the church gives them that space. But if they are simply using that platform for personal agenda, for politicking and for campaigning, it is absolutely wrong.
We don't see anybody, though, up in arms to say you can't use these. We've seen an increase of such, whether it be at funerals, church services, wherever it is, using the platform. And we don't hear anybody saying, I mean, even from the church leadership, to say, actually, you know what, you can't use this platform for this agenda.
Actually, the church does.
Usually, we don't hear it loud enough.
Especially at funerals, they do. If you worked in the rural areas as long as I did, you would know that the political voice was not just stifled, it was given a specific space. And in many instances, the church would not allow them to go beyond that space. And there was a reminder that, this is a funeral, not a political rally. There are instances where if you're a politician, all you'd be allowed to do is wave, literally. Wave, sit down. But the point I'm making here is, remember, Ndu, our people love our politicians as much as they love the church.
More than.
Now we will get on to what I wanted to ask. I'm going to backtrack this was sort of like laying ground for what I want to ask.
Build up to.
Yes, in 2007, one of the things that was leveled against the church were two things. One, their lack of voice, as in their lack of loud enough opposition to what was going on. One. Secondly, they were blamed for being biased. They took sides. Meaning, we had a political dispute in the country and they took sides. Was this a fair accusation?
It is not fair. You see, first of all, you have to appreciate that a religious leader is also a Kenyan who has interests in the political, whatever is going on in the political arena. But at the same time, they are leaders who are supposed to give guidance. So it is true that there are individual church leaders and religious leaders, more than beyond church leaders, Muslims and others, who specified and spoke openly about their stand as far as political, whatever was going on politically at the time in terms of parties and so on and candidates. That, in my view, can only be considered unfortunate, because as a Christian leader, you cannot declare your position openly, because you lead a people who are very diverse in their following. In our church, for example, we have people from across the board. We have people who believe and will die for Uhuru Kenyatta. There are people who believe and will die for William Ruto. There are people who believe and will die for Raila Odinga. People who believe and will die for Musalia Mudavadi and Kalonzo Musyoka and all these people. So if as a leader then I stand on the platform that has been given to me by God and I say we should vote for so and so, immediately I bring confusion in the minds of these people. Because there is no way I can do that as a Christian leader who is leading a diverse group of people who are mandated to make decisions through their vote. Now, when it came, let me contrast that with the referendum of the Constitution. Referendum of the Constitution, we are dealing with the laws that will govern the country. We are dealing with the principles that will guide how we live in this nation. I took space on our platform to guide the people and to tell them, these are the things we believe in, these things are wrong, these are right, this you can vote for, this you cannot vote for. Because now we are talking about principles, not parties, not people. And you did hear some of us, if you are watching that time, yes. And I personally had no qualms at all using our church platform to say this no. To say we cannot vote for this constitution because A, B, C, and D. Because we are dealing with matters of principle. But when it comes to politics, like 2022 that is coming, there is no way I can stand on the platform and say, vote for so and so, or vote for party A and don't vote for party B. That is absolutely wrong.
You could look at parties' manifestos and what parties stand for and say, no, this goes against the principles that we stand for.
If I was living in Britain or America, I would do that.
Why?
And why not in Kenya?
Why not in Kenya? Because our politics is 100% ethnic. Manifestos are good documents that
just for documents' sake.
Pieces of paper.
Yes, they are pieces of paper that nobody reads, nobody cares.
Nobody follows.
Most of them are actually
name.
almost the same, copy paste. So we have not reached the place where our politics is based on principles, values, ideologies that you can stand for and say, this party stands for what we believe in. And let's vote for it.
When we come out of this short break, we'll ask you what the religious leader's role or church's role is in ensuring that you shepherd us towards the right direction. Yes, you're separating yourselves from stage, but as well as you said, it's completely impossible to completely separate ourselves. We'll play a clip from Bishop Wilfred Lai of Mombasa Jesus Celebration Center in Mombasa, who is talking about the BBI.
Go just across the border here into Tanzania. Tanzania does not need BBI. Ni ujamaa na undugu. They don't need BBI. And actually, Kenyans are united. We are only divided by our leaders. We don't fight one another until there is election. So the leaders should tell us what is wrong with them. Because they are the ones that make us fight. And they are the ones that need BBI. They need to build bridges among themselves. We are already together. We don't need any bridges. So they ask me, do you support the BBI? The information in that document I have read, and it is good. But the agenda, I am shocked.
a church leader in this country hearing that, as far as that's concerned, we're not together, clearly separated there. Who then is responsible for propelling the message, whatever it may be?
I don't understand what you're saying.
Here we have a message, a political message coming out very clearly.
Yes.
Who then should take the reins when it comes to this? Looking at something like the BBI, the church is involved.
Yes.
The church is involved in this as well. So who then should be responsible for spreading this message? Should it be the leaders with the contribution of the church? Who should stand out?
BBI, unlike, say, the previous constitutional process that we had that ended up in the Constitution 2010, is almost purely a political process. This is something that was put together to resolve a political stalemate. So it makes it very difficult for religious leaders to speak very emphatically about it like we did in the Constitution. Yes, because it's a political process. Sometimes you are not sure, like Lai says, what the agenda is behind it. So you could find yourself speaking very, very strongly in support of the BBI, only for it to, when it manifests, you find that what this thing you are backing was a totally different animal. You could speak against it, and then it turns out to be a very good thing, So it puts us as religious leaders in a kind of dilemma. And you will find, therefore, that the religious community, particularly the Christian community, has been relatively quiet about the BBI because it is not clear what the real agenda of BBI is. So you get the document, and like Bishop Lai says, you read through it, and it is also very good. Really, I've read through it personally. I find very little that I would say I am against because it is well written, good ideas, good things. But the question, if you remember that this is a political process, you then ask yourself, but what are they really saying? What is this really about? It puts you in a very difficult situation as a religious leader. That does not mean that then we run away or keep quiet about it. We then speak into the principles that are supposed to guide us as a nation, whether this is within the BBI or not. One of the things we have recognized or realized in the past several elections is that in every election year, we have a tension in the country that sometimes has ended up in us killing one another. The economy of this country comes to a standstill. Actually, the economists tell us that we lose at least 2 years in every 5 years. The year before election and the year after election are basically written out of an economic program. So we operate on 3 years out of 5 as a country. This is not a very good thing. I've been in nations where elections are going on. You
wouldn't know it.
You would not know it. You would not know it. You will not see any evidence that any political thing is going on. In Kenya, we are like chain smokers. One cigarette lights another. Ours is one election lights the next election. So we finish and we start on another one. So this is what we need to speak into, and we have spoken into.
Are you speaking loud enough? And we look back at, like the clamor
right
for the
now
Constitution.
I'm on a whole national radio.
Loud enough by all religious leaders.
I think the point is well made, but when we say loud enough, it is, you have a caucus of, say, bishops. You have a caucus of, say, Pentecostal churches.
Yes.
You have gatherings where, because of the union of many voices, whatever you say will be heard louder because you represent a bigger congregation. So the question is, this sort of messaging that you're speaking of, is it heard in that broad spectrum where the voices can be heard loudest?
And let's put it in context.
Yes.
In the clamor for multi-partyism, in the clamor for a new constitution, you remember those days, you'd have the Catholic bishops coming out strongly, you'd have the Protestant bishops coming out, religious leaders under NCCK coming out and speaking. You'd see religious leaders actually coming out and saying, look, this is the way we need to take, this is the direction we need to take. Of late, what we see is religious leaders, just taking a back seat, issuing a statement saying we are going to demand that you tell us where your contribution is coming from, and that's all.
Now, you see, that comparison has been made many times, but it is not a fair one. Because the circumstances under which we were living at that time, the only people who could speak were the religious leaders and the civil society.
Why do you say they were the only ones, Bishop?
They were the only ones because the context was such that people were afraid to speak.
Yep.
I didn't hear your voice. They were whispering even in their houses.
Yes.
So there had to be a people who have the courage and have the mandate from God to stand in that space and speak on behalf of the people. And that is what I was talking about, the prophetic voice, where you said, thus says the Lord. And prophets, if you read the Bible, were people who are not afraid to be beaten up. They were not afraid to be killed. And very few of us are in that space.
So, but if you look at the times that you speak of, and I do agree with you, the times we live in right now are even more perilous than those days. Because
not at all.
Oh, yes, they are.
Now we can sit here and talk these things.
And everybody can talk.
Everybody can talk.
But the circumstances under which the citizenry live is dire.
That is true. And that is where we are saying the reason that the voice seems not to be heard is because the things that we are saying are not the things that people want to hear. I think I said just made a comment. Somebody talked about Kenyans and politics. Kenyans have come to that place, unfortunately, where the politician has become their God. What a politician says is so much more important than what a pastor says. It's so much more important than what a journalist says.
Why do you think this is so, sir?
Why do you think this is so? Because politicians have socialized Kenyans to believe.
Where has our church been when the politicians have taken center stage?
To speak up alongside or even louder than this voice that would say, I'll give you a perfect example. A politician comes into a church and donates money, for example, for a fund drive that they're having. They're not necessarily looking at the funds drive, but they're looking at the fact that they're going to be able to go in here and their voice will be heard a lot louder because of what they have been able to do. And so it becomes that, yes, because the constant allowance of such becomes that's the voice that they hear. Whatever they're saying at this point sometimes doesn't really matter. But the things that they'll be able to do, the platforms on which they've been given now the preeminence to be able to do some of the things that they do, then we don't hear this voice that should be alongside, even louder than, in terms of how you should live, in terms of morality, in terms of how the country should be able to run. We see them using these platforms all the time.
Put on any TV station in this country at news time. What is the first news item?
Politics.
Yes, it's politics.
It's politics. It's politics.
With the voice of the politician.
So, if now I come back to the media, the media has made politicians to be our God. Pick any newspaper. The headlines are about politicians. So, even a young baby growing up seems to think that these are the most important people.
And
in fact, Kenyans, if there's no politics in the news, it's like today there was no news. Are we together?
It's true.
So a preacher like myself can be speaking as loud as we can, but we'll find ourselves in page 6, page 20, The other
if
day,
they're-
the other day we
I want
called
to
a press
differ.
conference. Just a moment.
When the clergy speaks on these matters of national importance, they
Yes.
get the same prominence.
No.
When the Catholic bishops issued an edict on Harambes in church, they got maximum prominence. When Anglican Archbishop Ole Sapit did the same, he got the coverage. When you keep quiet, when you seem to be subdued on these matters of national importance, because the politicians are coming and telling us, you see, about BBI, apart from hearing now that clip of Wilfred Lai, why are we not hearing the voice of the church saying, look, this is what we want to say about BBI? We're just seeing the church going to the steering committee and that's it.
Just a few days ago, the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya, which I lead as chair, called a press conference to speak on BBI. The media was there. We gave a position as to what we think about BBI, which is what I've just said this morning.
Yeah.
Come news time, there was nothing. Only later on, there was a small something put somewhere. Why? Because on that same day, there was a politician saying what seemed to be more important.
So you didn't get the coverage.
They didn't get the coverage, but they were there. The media was there.
Are you saying that the media deliberately gives you a blackout?
It's not blackout. The media has priorities.
It's a prominence.
It
that
is
you're
a
giving,
prominence
right?
that is given to the politics because they know, that's why I'm saying that Kenyans have become so politicized that when there is no political news and you are in business, so I understand why you would want to give politicians prominence, because if you are not giving us politics, then I'll not be watching your station. I'll go to the next one where they can tell me about who said what and who is fighting with who and so on. We love blood, in this country, especially political blood. So wherever it is spilling, that's where we want to go. So when a clergyman is coming to say peaceful things and trying to draw Kenyans back, that is not news. So unfortunately, Kenyans have got to that place where politics is the everything, all in all, and politicians love it. So that's why they go to a funeral service and they don't talk about the dead person. They don't talk about the family that is grieving. They talk about politics.
They talk about themselves.
About themselves. I was in a funeral service one time, and this young girl who had lost the father, to the funeral of the father. And the politicians came and, as usual,
Took over.
The girl woke up and picked the microphone and told them off. These were very senior politicians whose names I would not want to mention on the air. And she said, when my father was sick, none of you came here. My father worked with you and you and you when he was okay. He laid down his life for you and you and you. When he fell sick for several years, none of you visited him. None of you came to take him to hospital and so on and so forth. Now you come here to not even talk about him, but talk about yourselves. Please get out of this place and allow us to mourn my father. It was so beautiful.
was
People
powerful,
clapped.
yes.
It was powerful. I've never seen anything like that. But the owners, in quote, of the function really need to take charge. When politicians come to our church, I take charge. I determine what they can do and what they cannot do, what they can say and what they will not say, where they will stand and where they will not stand. So in our church, we don't have a principle of not giving politicians a chance, but we give honor to whom honor is due. So that if the county governor comes to church, he's not a member of our church, and comes to worship with us on that particular day, we'll give him recognition because he's a leader of the county. I will say, congregation, today we are privileged to have so-and-so come to worship with us. If there's a time, I'll say, please come and greet the people briefly. But I'll stand next to him
So to go and grab the mic.
so that if he's going on and saying things that are not relevant, I'll take the
tap on
mic.
the shoulder is necessary.
Yes. If the president comes to our church,
Yep.
there is no way that as a church leader, I will say, just wave in the air. This is the president of the country. So we will run with the service as usual. And then at an appropriate time, I'll say, Your Excellency, if you could come and greet the congregation. And we'll give him an opportunity to greet the congregation.
So what if he gets into politics at that point?
I'll still stand by his side.
Okay.
Good.
This is my space.
It doesn't matter who it is.
This is my space.
Let's take a
I am
short
the
break.
president of
the church.
that
This
space.
is you're the head. Let's take another short break at 8 minutes to 9 o'clock. In the studio with us on the hot seat is Bishop Dr. David Oginde. We are talking about separation of church and state. And of course, that question that we keep asking ourselves, where is the church in matters of national importance and national politics?
People say what they don't mean and they mean what they don't say. If the document was what they are taking around this country, it would be a different story. But they are taking across this country the wrong thing. It's not what is written. They are telling us to read, but when we read, so what? You are not telling us what is written there. People are trying to create things for themselves. They want us to go into a referendum so that we can create some positions for tribal people, tribal leaders who have finished their term. They need to look for something else to do. If you have served 2 terms as a governor, go look for something else to do. Go home. Stop trying to tell us something at this. No, that is selfish. That is selfish. It's not unity. It is you are overloading us who pay taxes with your selfish creation of positions. We say no to that.
And this is where it gets murky. Where is the stand of the church on certain issues? Where is the guidance of the church on certain issues? So if you feel that the politicians are taking over this process, why not just come out and call them out and say, look, you politicians, this is exactly what we think. Instead of talking about them sort of on the side. You have the power and the position and the mandate to speak directly to them.
I don't know what you mean by on the side and directly, because I think Lai is talking directly on this particular issue according to his understanding of that particular, of BBI. And when a pastor stands in a congregation and speaks to the congregation, he's guiding his flock. He's guiding the people who have submitted themselves to his leadership. And so he has that responsibility to tell them what he thinks is right to do in that context. I said that earlier that the challenge with BBI is that exactly what Pastor Lai is saying. The challenge with BBI is that it's a political process. And a political process is usually very tricky because not everything is what you see. And that is what he's saying. So, like, for example, he has said that this thing is just about creating positions for some people and so on. That is how he sees it. Somebody else could come and say something completely opposite. Because politics is never, like Michuki said, it's like juggling liver, you know. You are never sure where it is going, you know. And it becomes very difficult, especially for a religious leader, speaking to a diverse congregation, to give very clear directions. Because when you think they are going this way, you could find they are actually going this other way. So it becomes very tricky. That's why I said, we stand with principles in such situations. We say, this country, we have been fighting ourselves. Why have we been fighting ourselves? I agree totally with Lai in the first part you played, when he said Kenyans are united it is politicians who divide us. It is absolutely true. When you come to work in this space, you have hundreds of people here from all over the country. You have no problem working together. If you have problems with individuals, not
A group.
where they
Not
come
their
from.
tribe.
Not with their community.
Not with their community. So Kenyans, you go to the streets where they are selling burgers. They sell burgers together, you know?
Yep.
And you find our Njiko and Anotieno selling burgers one next to another. When one person wants to go to a place, they say, please watch for me my wares.
Yeah.
You know? And when a customer comes, they sell those wares on their behalf.
On their behalf.
Are we together? That's the ordinary Kenyan. We are together. But the politicians don't like a people who are together.
Together.
Yeah.
Bishop Oginde, should the church be the moral compass for the country?
Not should, is. It's our mandate. Yes.
How successful is this mandate?
This mandate is very successful in the sense that we speak into that space. Now, just like a preacher, I have people gathered every Sunday morning about in our main church, about 10,000 people. I speak what I believe should be told to them on that particular day, according to how I've read the Bible, according to how I've waited on God, and what I think God is saying. And I come and tell them, I have absolutely no control over who goes and takes what I have said seriously and puts it into practice. But my role is to declare. I cannot, if you come to our church, if you are a member of our church, I cannot follow you up to make sure that you do what we have said.
Why not?
Because I can't. I'm not your police, you know.
But actually you are.
No, my role is to tell you the right thing to do. Look at Jesus. Jesus never followed anybody. One time, actually, he was preaching, and the people thought he had said the wrong thing. The crowd went away, and his disciples were very disturbed. And when they saw that the crowd had walked away on Jesus, he turned to his 12 disciples and he asked them, do you also
Want to go?
want to go? Because human beings have been given freedom of choice. And like somebody well put it, those choices have consequences. So mine is to show you the right way to follow. Yours is to make the decision to follow that way.
And when you see most of your congregation has not been following what you've been saying the past 4 weeks, don't you get concerned?
I tell them again. That's why I'm in business.
So you repeat, you buttress the message.
I continue to tell them. And you see that they will
And you leave it at that. Aren't you going to deploy something and say, okay, wait, maybe I need to follow them around. Maybe I need to have...
How?
Instead of
But
waiting for 7 days.
Let me answer him. Within the church, you have ministries, don't you? You have this particular branch of the church that takes care of orphans,
Widows,
takes care of
the
widows.
sick.
It is
takes
true.
Care of the, yes. Within those units, the follow-up that we're speaking of is possible.
It is not possible. Right now, assume you're my member.
You've said this 3 times.
He's
going
making
I think
a
you
point
should.
there.
I'm taking this
Sunday's
as an
right around the
invitation,
corner.
but
Now,
carry on.
please follow. This is now, I'll follow you up on this one. The way you're saying. So assume you are my member.
Yes.
And you come to church every Sunday. Okay? How do I follow you into this studio today to make sure that everything you say on air today is according to the teachings I've given you?
Actually, follow up.
How do I follow you up in your house to make sure that the way you treat your wife and children is the way I have taught you to do? How do I follow you when you are driving on the streets to make sure that you are not overlapping and you're not driving through red lights? I give you the principles. I tell you, for a good person, you must obey the traffic lights. You need to treat your wife with respect. You need to treat your children this way. When you have opportunity to speak to public, talk with decorum, etc., etc. There is no way now I can follow you up to make sure
Bishop,
on every specific.
You had.
Pose.
You see, Bishop, you had an evangelical body.
Yes,
Now, you meet very often,
yes,
isn't it?
true.
Why don't you just meet once a year? Because you need to be able to not only discuss matters that pertain to the different churches or the organizations that are represented, but there is a greater calling to which you must adhere to. Meaning, among your members, you also want to make sure that you support each other. That's the follow-up I'm talking about. Not going to live in someone's house. But again, whenever I ask questions, I'm leading to something. What I wanted to ask is this. You see, the politicians are actually members of this country. Members, when I say members, it's because they're also members of our congregation and our churches.
True.
So their utterances simply represent the state of the health of the nation. The real enemy of the church has been said to be secularism, or what they call the New Age movement. Is this a fair assessment?
That is true.
Why is it true?
It is true because human beings by nature, and if you are a student of the Bible, if you read the Bible, human tendency has always been away from God. A desire and a pursuit of self-rule. So that I want to be the God of my life. I want to do the things that I want to do. You will have noticed that one of the greatest movements today is on human rights. Our Constitution has a whole section on human rights.
Detailed.
Very detailed. And whereas this is also very good on the face of it, it is an anti-God spirit. It is an independence from God spirit. It is what the Bible calls the Antichrist Spirit, because it sets God, man, as their own God. So you do what you want and nobody should ask you. I do what I want and nobody should ask me. So it sets us in that place where nobody else can tell me anything. And even governments are going to find it more and more difficult to rule. In this country, there was a time when the president has spoken, the president has spoken. That was it. Now we are in a situation where the president can speak and people can tell him off.
And we also speak.
We also speak.
Yes.
Yes. President can make a decision and we overturn it.
It's disregarded.
It is disregarded.
Yes.
That is the spirit of the new age. That is the spirit that is now going to engulf the world until this world comes to a standstill. Yes. Because even at home, when I was growing up, my father's word was law. I mean, if he said it, he has said. There was no question. I don't remember once in my life ever asking my father why. Never.
Now,
my son, who is a little boy, we must discuss. And the why question must be answered.
There must be consensus.
There's some though. I mean, and just with this new age, a growing population,
Yes.
Literally day by day, who don't believe in God whatsoever, counted as part of the population of Kenya, as per their rights within the boundaries of this country. How does this all encompass them? If we're talking about the church being the moral compass, the church then being involved, God being the center, if that's the premise upon which we set all of this,
right,
how does this take then these into consideration?
My simple answer, first of all, is that there's no person who does not believe in God. Is it just which God? Just as I've said now, there are people who have got to that place where they are their own God. And so they don't want anything else. But they have a God, myself. So it is me, I, and myself. I do what I want, when I want, how I want, and no one asks me. Does that remove them from the jurisdiction of God, the true God? Not at all. Because just like if you have a children, a little baby declares independence in your house, does that remove them from being, stop them from being your children?
Yeah.
No. It's just, they are just being foolish. Yeah. But where they sit, they think they are really independent. Mommy cannot tell me anything. I do what I want, when I want, and how I want. it only makes your life more difficult as a mother. It only makes you more angry with your child. It only makes the life of that child more difficult in your house, because they are living within the jurisdiction of your house, but they are declaring independence in that same house.
How do you live?
Life
How do you
becomes
live with these
very
people?
difficult. That is what human beings, or some human beings, have done. They are declaring independence in God's world. I wish they could go into another universe which God did not create. Because if God decides to take their breath now, they will say nothing.
They'll be truly independent.
They will be truly independent. Thank you. I think we are getting to to the same table. So it is really foolishness. It is really foolishness.
Does your
the
does
Bible
your
actually
ministry
says
engage with such people?
the what?
Does your ministry engage with such people?
Yes, we do.
Those who go out saying, you know what, I don't believe there is anything
That
like
there
God.
is a God.
That
yeah.
is that is why we are in business, my friend, to try and help them to recognize that there's God. We do engage with them. We do engage with them because
But we are seeing an increasing number of these people.
they are.
You know, in every little community and every little society, you will find somebody who will tell you, you know what, this God thing of yours. And yet we have churches that are also growing and increasing.
What has happened is that we have a growing population of non-church going people. Now, imagine that here is a young person who is not going to church and therefore lives their life outside of church. This person gets married to another non-church going person. They live their lives outside of church. Then they get a child or children. How will these children ever get to know about church? Because I got to church simply because my parents took me to
Introduced
church.
you to.
Yeah. So what is going to happen is that as these generations increase, there is going to be a greater number of people, and this is what has happened in Europe. I met a 12-year-old with the parents. This was a family that was visiting a friend of mine, and she invited me to go and be with them. So in the village, you know, so we traveled all the way to the village and in this friend's home. So in the evening, she's now giving us a brief. It was a Saturday evening on what is going to happen tomorrow. So she says we will wake up this time, we'll have breakfast, and then after that we'll go to church. From church we'll come back, we'll have lunch, and then I want to take you around to see around, And normal briefing, no big deal. When she's finished, this 12-year-old turns to the mother and says, "Mommy, what is church?" They were Canadians. You could see the faces turn red. This is a 12-year-old who does not even know what the word church means. He knows that we are going to go there tomorrow. It's part of our program, but he doesn't know what it
actually is.
It is. So this couple gets very embarrassed and says, "No, don't worry about it. You know that we have never introduced our son to church. That's why." This boy was so curious, could hardly sleep, because he wanted to know what this church is.
We're going to church tomorrow. City, ask you the final question
Yes,
to Bishop Oginde.
During the discussions around our constitution, there was a matter of the Kadhi's court and the issues surrounding it within the constitution. And if I remember the voice of the church, it was loudly against it. Again, would you not say this is religious intolerance of the highest order?
Thank you very much. It depends on where you stand or sit while you say that. The topic of this day was separation of church and state. And I tried to correct it to say separation of religion and state. What that means is that there is freedom of religion in this country, and you are free to believe in trees as your God. That the Constitution allows you to do that. So people are free to worship in whichever way they want to, in whichever place they want to, and provided it doesn't contradict or the Constitution or break our values. But So what the government is supposed to do is to provide an enabling environment for each person to worship their God, for each person, or whether individually or in community, to practice their religion. That is the role of government, to provide that kind of a space. What we see with Kadhi's courts, and now it is not just Kadhi's courts, we see a situation where government has now brought a religious practice of a particular religion and put it as part of government to be paid for by taxpayers. That is what we were talking about. It is not religious intolerance. We have no problems with Muslims practicing their faith. This is a nation that is everybody's free. That has now gone on, perhaps you know, where it was in the news, in the papers, and public knowledge, that government is now paying madrasa teachers to teach madrasa. How do you do that in a multi-religious society? It is not practical, it is not right, it is not correct. And this we must say, even if you call it religious intolerance, because...
Yes, what if they offer the other religions the same sort of platform?
Like pay teachers for Sunday school, for example. Is that what you would be talking about?
That is where people would want us to go. But that is not the role of government. Government is not supposed to pay Sunday school teachers to teach Sunday school. That is the role of the church.
It's the church.
That is the church to pay Sunday school teachers to ensure that, because this is a specific religion. Then you will go to the traditional cultural beliefs and pay their people to propagate their beliefs. There is no ending to this when you get into that space.
When you open that
it's
that
like
door,
a Pandora's box.
That's it.
Yeah. So what we were basically saying is, Kadhi's courts is dealing with matters of marriage between Muslims, two Muslim people. They arbitrate on disagreements and whatever may come out of a marriage situation and other personal matters. Why don't you allow these people to deal with that in their space? Church, my daily work when I'm away from Sunday, on a daily basis, I am dealing with those kinds of things.
Yeah.
People come to me, the
counseling
husband and wife, they are in trouble, they come, I arbitrate, I talk with them, I try to reconcile them, and most of them get reconciled. The government doesn't pay me for it. If they don't agree with the advice that I've given, and their disagreement goes beyond what the church can handle, then they go to a civil court, and it is dealt with there according to the law of the land. This is what we are saying. It has nothing to do with religious intolerance.
Bishop Dr. David Oginde, asante sana for joining us this morning. Thank you for coming in 8 to 9:15. It's now 9:15. Asante sana. We'd like to invite you again so we can actually go into the depths of some of these conversations that we've had. It's an open invitation. Please take our call when we call next. Right.
I always take that.
Asante sana.
That's how I ended up here.
Asante sana. We wish you a good day.
Thank you.
Have a good one. And asante for joining us. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. We've been talking to Bishop Dr. David Oginde of the Christ is the Answer Ministries, talking about the separation of church and state. This is one of the preeminent leaders. Thank you very much and have a good day, Your Grace.
Thank you.